Good morning and welcome back to the Weekly Pulse podcast. I'm Jeff Snyder, the founder of the Morning Pulse and the host of the new Broadcast Retirement Network. So glad you found us. We have got another exciting show this week. We've got great contributors who are going to be talking to us about retirement, the markets, technology, personal finance, so much more. I can't wait for you to hear it all. I know they're chomping at the bit. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this great episode of the Weekly Pulse. We're going to kick things off a little bit differently this week. Devin Banerjee is out on vacation. You can catch him next week on the network, of course. But joining me now, senior technology and consumer products reporter for the Motley Fool, also a contributor on the Broadcast Retirement Network, my friend Daniel Klein. Hi, Daniel. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Jeffrey?
So does it feel any different to start off the show versus...
I'm so used to following Devin. It's like, bat and lead off. I don't know that I have the speed for that.
Yo, I think you got the speed. I think you got the chops. I think both of you guys can each hit singles, doubles, triples, and home runs, and you guys can walk too. You're fully capable athletes.
Well, I often describe myself as a utility infielder. I can do everything reasonably well.
That's what is it they say? Master of none.
Oh dear God.
Geez. Oh well. Anyway, master of all trades or whatever, master of some. Anyway, we have totally blown that cliche away. But Dan, it's always a pleasure talking to you twice a week.
It's jack of all trades, master of none.
There you go. It's always a pleasure talking to you because I can feel comfortable just knowing that I don't have to be perfect because I know that you will be. So Dan, what's top of mind for you this week? I think you want to talk a little bit about Bed Bath & Beyond, which I go to regularly.
So what a very struggling retailer. And Bed Bath & Beyond is closing about 60 more stores. They're in the middle of, let's call it a turnaround plan. And the one thing I want to say about this is when you read the story and they call it a retail apocalypse and they blame the internet, you're really only getting a piece of the story. Did the internet contribute to Bed Bath & Beyond? Absolutely, because Bed Bath & Beyond did not do a good job putting its merchandise for sale on the internet. So that forced people who didn't want to drive to a store to look for other options. Mm-hmm. If they'd gone to an omni-channel model early, like many other retailers have done, and embraced sort of what consumers are looking for, convenience and being able to buy online and pick up in store, buy online, return in store, they have a good selection of merchandise. I like going to Bed Bath & Beyond just to kind of look around because you don't know what the Beyond is going to be. They might have coffee makers, they might have candy, they might have, really cool stuff. So, they have a great travel section. So this is really a case of a store that leaned into being a brick and mortar and didn't have an overall strategy. And to say that that's the fault of the internet is really only a tiny piece of it.
Yeah, I don't think it's the fault of the internet. I think it's the fault of ownership and management to adapt and to the changing environment. That's that case with many of these businesses that fail. I don't think you can put it all on the quote unquote internet. I really feel sorry though for the workers, the people that have jobs that are depending on these jobs for to pay their rent, to pay their family, to save, all those kind of things. I mean, those are the people who are really impacted heavily.
It is. The good news is, and I don't know, Bed Bath & Beyond doesn't share what its minimum wage is, but both Target and Walmart have dramatically raised their wages and need a ton of people. Yeah. Costco pays $15 an hour minimum, and they're generally hiring. Amazon pays $15 an hour minimum and has a lot of job openings at its warehouses. These aren't easy jobs, but working at Bed Bath & Beyond wasn't an easy job. Yeah. So hopefully these people could land on their feet. And the other thing that's worth noting when you sort of see the term retail apocalypse is you'll see the store's closing number. It's going to come in at 8,000 or 9,000 this year, a record or near record. What they're not telling you is the number of stores that will open will be greater. And a lot of those are smaller stores, your Casper Mattress, your Warby Parker Glasses, but you also have companies like TJX, which are opening Marshalls and HomeGoods and TJ Maxx stores. Mm-hmm. Ross Ross Dress for Less is expanding very quickly, and those are very large footprint stores. Five Below, which is kind of a medium-sized store, is opening hundreds of stores. Dollar General, which is another, not a huge store, but a decent-sized store, they're going to open 1,000 stores as they've done for the last few years. So some retail is thriving,
Right.
and you might see, an anchor store, a J.C. Penney closes at your mall, and it's replaced by a shared work, a gym, and two smaller stores. But you're not generally seeing a constriction of the overall number of jobs, and certainly not the number of stores. We're actually going to have more stores at the end of the year than we did at the beginning of the year.
Yeah. Like again, I completely hear what you're saying, and I agree. Let's hope that people can transition effectively into some other roles. Dan, let's shift gears. I want to talk to you a little bit about the Hulu redesign. First, for our audience, let's just tell them what Hulu is. They may or may not be. I think they are, but they may not be understanding exactly what Hulu is.
So Hulu is a streaming service, much like Netflix or Amazon Prime, and it has two things. Well, really three things: a selection of original programming that's unique to Hulu. Then it also has network shows from companies that originally were partners. Disney's now the full owner, but
Mm-hmm.
generally it has shows that air a day after or maybe 2 days after they aired on a network. And then it has some archival older programming. So it is a Netflix like streaming service with a little more focus on recent television or recent seasons. And one of my complaints about every streaming service is it's hard to find things. They don't
Yeah.
operate like television. They're not necessarily conducive to flipping around or switching between things. Some of that's technology. And Hulu has acknowledged that in a fashion, and they've come out and they've redesigned their interface to try to make it more intuitive. And I haven't seen it yet; it's not out. This was just a news story today, but that is a good sign that that Disney, which now owns it and is about to roll Hulu into their package with the new Disney Plus, which is a
Mm-hmm.
Disney-based streaming service, and ESPN Plus, which is a sports-based streaming service. A lot more people are going to get Hulu, so trying to make it easier for them to use is just a very smart play.
Yeah, absolutely. I have complained, and I'm pretty savvy, but I've complained that when I go to Netflix, Amazon, these. First of all, I hate navigating, trying to look at a library and trying to figure out what I want to watch. To me, is very difficult. When we have a Roku here. We also have Hulu. It has a little clicker, or I can use my phone, the app on my phone to. It's very hard for me to find content that I want, and I would say it's not just those services. It's YouTube as well. I mean, YouTube has a gazillion. I don't even know. There's a Googleplex probably of content out there. How do you find it? I think that this is a larger problem, not just for video purveyors like the ones you're mentioning, but also the Amazons of the world as well. How do you
and
find
and,
stuff?
po- and podcasts as well. So it's a huge problem. And one of the things that doesn't really exist is what I want is an interface where whatever things I've subscribed for, I can get them all in one place.
Yeah.
And the closest options for that, there are two. If you are a Dish Sling subscriber, you can also put your HBO, a number of paid services, you can also add that to those interfaces. So when you're flipping around their guides, you'll see a number of paid channels, sort of like the way you watch HBO when you're on cable. And in some cases with cable, you're starting to see Netflix and maybe other services pop up as sort of a channel. When you flip by, channel 127, it's Netflix, and you have the choice to log in and then enter the Netflix interface.
Yeah.
The thing I don't want to have to do is use the little remote that you lose where you change input.
Yeah.
That I find very confusing, or to have to switch between devices to watch different things. But honestly, I've been a Netflix user almost since the beginning, and sometimes I have trouble finding the show I've been watching.
Yeah, you and me both. And I also don't like. I have to be honest and say I haven't really watched Netflix in a while after Last Chance U. I just can't find. I really like the fact that they had all. And we've talked about this. We've wrestled with this, but they cannot. Um, you cannot find things that I really like, and I like. I can't find. The stuff they took off and Disney is taking, and The Office I think is going away. So that's a problem for me too.
Yeah, so I think one of the issues on Netflix is because they're so anti-commercial.
Hmm.
What I would like if, so I've been watching Arrow on Netflix. if before I watched every episode of Arrow, when there were 7 seasons I had to catch up on, if they offered me a preview for something they think I like, now a preview I had the option to skip, I'd probably watch the preview to try to get ideas for what's next. I think of this as like a bookstore problem. Bookstores are so large that other than the sort of new shelves or the recommendation shelves, it's very hard to walk into a bookstore not knowing what you're going to buy and pick
Yeah.
a book.
Yeah.
And Netflix is very much like that. Like the little picture and description don't tell you much, and the recommendations, my wife and I probably should have separate accounts, within the same Netflix account, but we don't. So she watches a lot of true crime, which sort of, sends me results that don't really match what I'm watching. And then some things, like, just because you like one comedian doesn't mean you're going to like another comedian. There needs to be a deeper layer of artificial intelligence there, and I think they'll get there. Amazon's done a very good job of suggesting products, or at least a much better job than it used to do. So I think it'll improve, but having companies actively address it is a good sign.
Let me put you on the spot. You uh, have a brokerage account. You save from Plan for Retirement. You write for the Motley Fool. Are there lessons to be taken from Hulu, Roku, and these other Amazon, and that could be imparted into the financial services world? We've only got a couple minutes left, but I wanted to give you the chance to opine on that because I think you're a consumer products reporter and you're also a technology reporter, and you see the divergence and also the convergence of things.
Yeah, so one of the problems I see with the sort of various trading options is they're not user friendly. And I'll go back to something Amazon does. When you buy an Amazon streaming device through your account, when it gets to you, you're already logged in. You don't have to do anything to set it up. It knows who you are. It has all your Amazon information. It opens with a little cutesy video that shows you how to use it. That's really easy. If I log on to Brokerage X, there's like 1,000 choices, and it's very daunting. And maybe I just want to buy shares of stocks, but I can buy put limits and other things. I think there needs to be almost like a for dummies option where it's just very, very simple. It's very transparent on the fees, which a lot of companies have been dropping fees, and it puts customers first. And I'm actually really surprised in an area that's heavily competitive, that does not have much differentiation. At least Netflix has shows that Hulu doesn't have. One brokerage does not have anything another one doesn't have for the most part, and they're not in any way that I've noticed differentiating in terms of interface.
Yeah, absolutely. Well put. And hence the Weekly Polls podcast and the brand new Broadcast Retirement Network. Daniel Klein, always a pleasure talking with you. And now I get to talk to you twice in a week because you will be on Tuesdays, Tech Tuesdays, on the BRN AM show. You can catch Dan there. But of course, you can always catch Daniel's writing for the Motley Fool. Dan, always a pleasure talking to you. Have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you soon.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Jeff.
Welcome back. And, what would our show be without our market segment? Everyone wants to know what's going on with the markets, and we have a great dynamic duo. We've got today Kevin Kelly. He's the co-founder of Delphi Digital, and back from vacation, the lead anchor for the TD Ameritrade Network and the host of two shows there, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, Mr. Oliver J. Rennick. Guys, how are you?
Yo, what up?
Doing great.
Guys, Oliver, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
On vacation.
Cheerio.
And Kevin held down the fort last week. Cheerio, my friend. So let's. What was it like coming back, catching up, and there's nothing going on in the market this week, right? So how was getting back into things?
It was kind of this perfect example of how our narrative and sort of coverage that you often hear about markets and some of the events that you think might be disruptive or don't live up to expectations in terms of the market action. That kind of changed a little bit as the equity market came under some pressure over this past week, and some of these economic data points came up weak. But overall, it has been still a very resilient equity market, and a kind of resumption of trend this last week where, despite some pretty weak data, some of the worst we've seen in this recovery, are now failing to really kind of break out the trend of people buying stocks with the expectations that rates stay low, buying bonds with those expectations, gold and some other things as well. But we have yet to kind of extend to new highs on any of those asset classes. So the market is kind of hovering in trend at the moment is the way I would describe it.
Yeah, when you look, and real quick, I'll come to you in a second, Kev, but I'm just looking at the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which is just a broad-based index. I realize there are other indices to follow, but we're still kind of around the same number we were a year ago.
Yep.
We're over
Yeah.
26,000. So does I mean
even further? It's almost been 2 years now. The S&P 500 is basically right kind of where it was Jan high of 2018.
Yeah, so not bad in terms of we haven't regressed. I guess when you look at certain indices, there's a potential that there has been regression or things change around. We'll ask you guys that in a minute, but it's just kind of flat. And when you look at some of the economic indices out there, wage growth, job growth, and we'll get Oliver's point on this as well. But I mean, it is kind of flatty feeling that as well, GDP numbers, et cetera. How do you look at all this?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at the longer term trends, and we've talked about this a lot, I think, to Oliver's point, you have seen, especially the last couple of weeks, some of these key economic indicators that, whether you want to make an argument for some of them leading inflation, some of them actually leading the business cycle, have come in a little bit, I guess you say they've been underwhelming. You had, the jobs numbers today, for example, and you still had wages growing year over year, I think, just shy of 3%, which, I mean, isn't anything to write home about, but I think what you're starting to see is obviously the probabilities of the Fed continuing on this. We'll call it, I don't want to say an easing cycle yet because we've only really had 2 cuts, but the odds that they cut again here in October certainly have ramped up. Just as you start to see some of this deteriorating data come in, below expectations, and so what I think is interesting too, and we're talking about the S&P basically hovering flat for the better part of the last 2 years. When you look at the bond market, right, I think what everyone's trying to figure out is the signal that the bond market is sending. It's always that classic dynamic or dichotomy: is the bond market right, is the stock market right? And oftentimes people like to side with the bond market here. And again, what you've seen is yields absolutely collapse to a large degree, which means treasury bonds and prices are rising. And so you could make the argument you didn't see as big of a reaction in yields this week. At least with some of these indicators coming out, and maybe you could argue that was a bit more priced into the bond market, or the bond market's been calling for this type of slowdown for a lot longer. I think the key here now is whether the U.S. consumer can continue to remain strong, can really bolster up the economy, can continue to keep things chugging along and extend out those recessionary fears. And if so, then I think risk assets in the S&P could certainly move higher from here. But again, the bond market has been sending some pretty ominous signs. Over the last, I'd say, 9 to 10 months.
Yeah, Oliver, Kevin makes a good point. We're heading into it's the fall now. We've got football season. We're coming into Thanksgiving. March Black Friday. People are theoretically are going to be out there buying. Hopefully, not on a lot of debt. But I mean, is Kevin any thoughts on that as we approach the holiday season? I mean, we're so dependent on the American consumer. Can we continue to depend on them?
The irony is that around this time last year, we had a pretty big market event that then put a bit of a chill on the consumer around the fourth quarter. So definitely, if you are a market bull or an economic bull, you're hoping something like that doesn't happen. I'm sort of still kind of in the camp that that kind of market risk, the fear of recession, sort of causing recession, and stock market dynamics is sort of a signaling method for fear is probably one of the biggest risks out there, just because even though the economic data is printing some pretty bad stuff this past week, it's pretty hard still to really be convinced that recession is imminent. And it sounds a little bit crazy when you print the lowest manufacturing in 10 years and the worst services ISM in 3 years. But we heard 2 kind of competing cases. We spoke with Nouriel Roubini, Dr. Doom, this morning, who has a litany, as you might expect. He's got a litany of, bearish cases that seem to be getting closer to fruition. And then we also spoke with a real smart economist over at Renaissance Macro, Neil Dutta, who, points out that, look, even though there are some really tense geopolitical, games of chicken is the way Nouriel Roubini describes it right now being played, where if any of those go wrong, they're the wild card for real bad situations. It's hard to argue that that's incorrect. But to Neil Dutta's point, you also have new home sales and housing that has really been a robust portion of this year's economy. You have employment that still, even as labor market shows cracks, is at 40-year lows. So it's tough to really think things collapse. But that being said, the one thing I would kind of want to leave listeners with is we had such expectations that this was going to happen in the market throughout the later portions of the summer. Fund manager surveys, bond rallies, gold rallies, the whole idea that really all these geopolitical tensions were going to coalesce with the economy to really break down in a meaningful way. What's interesting is that now that those numbers have arrived and the bad numbers in the U.S. are here, we haven't made new highs in gold. We haven't made new highs in bonds. Mm-hmm. So is the data not living up to the bad expectations of how rough things are going to get? And that's probably a good point to maybe talk some Bitcoin.
Yeah, let's one quick question before we go to Bitcoin. We can spend 5 minutes on Bitcoin, Kev. But what I want to, Oliver, you talked to so many people during the course of a week on both of your programs. And, you just mentioned, you just called Nouriel Roubini Dr. Doom and kind of how he's known.
Yeah.
Do you think that people, just your best guess, you don't know people thinking inside their own brain, but do they actually have to kind of reaffirm their own brand because they're doing so much TV, so much media that, they have to come in and kind of continue to have that same bearish mentality? Is
That's a fair question. It's a fair question.
And I'm not just questioning Nouriel Roubini. I mean,
there's perma bulls, there's perma bears. Yeah, no, I totally get your point. It's a good question from a media kind of perspective. It's tough. It's tough to find people who make really strong calls and then kind of don't still hang by those calls. In Roubini's case, this is kind of what he does is he constantly looks for the risk points. That's kind of what he gets paid to do. That's his field, so it's a little bit different. He's not really a timer, but there's definitely a lot of people who are try to time, and that's very difficult. So if somebody's been saying something for a really long time and those things haven't come true, it's a good point to bring up for listeners that you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt. Obviously, that's been bearish case, but there's a lot of perma bulls out there too the last year that keep saying we're blowing out to new highs, and those new highs we get are only like measly percentages above the last ones. We're basically flat for 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wasn't just it just struck me as interesting when you mentioned
totally.
Not to pick on Dr. Roubini. Okay, Kev, let's have at it. We had you on the network earlier this week talking about crypto and whatnot. But you give us now it's Friday. So that was I think Wednesday. So let's talk a little bit about crypto. How are you seeing things?
Yeah, 2 days feels like 2 years in this market. It's pretty crazy, as you know. But no, I mean, Bitcoin crypto market had a pretty sizable sell-off over the last couple of weeks, really stemming from last week. Part of that, as mentioned on the show, was in part, I don't think the catalyst was necessarily anything major more than, kind of a technical sell-off. It broke below a key technical indicator point. You had a ton of liquidations. There's a lot of leverage that gets used in the crypto market, especially for Bitcoin, which is the most liquid of all the crypto assets. And so what's interesting actually is if you look at, how the rest of the market held up, a lot of the larger crypto assets like your ethers and your litecoins of the world that people tend to look at sometimes as kind of a higher beta play on Bitcoin. A lot of those sold off even more as you would expect, but some of these less liquid kind of crypto/digital assets that really don't have, robust markets, and you don't actually have people borrowing against them or really levering up for some of those positions, actually held up a bit better. So I think part of that narrative is certainly, an unwinding of some of these, levered up positions that again, kind of stem from is a little bit of a hangover from the rally that we saw, to Oliver's point, throughout this summer with gold and Bitcoin rallying with bonds and kind of safe haven assets. But no, I mean, I think it's certainly getting to a certain inflection point and kind of tying it back to our broader conversation about the economic data, and now the bad data is finally here that everyone's kind of been anticipating. I think it's a really interesting point. It's a good one. And I definitely side with Oliver on this because when you think about the forward expectations for, risk assets, markets in general, now the fact that the bad data is here, and you still see, the S&P sitting 2% or 3% off its all-time high. You almost kind of get to the point where you don't necessarily know, and this kind of goes back to people who, Dr. Dooms or kind of make their name as perma bulls or perma bears. You have a lot of uncertainty right now that's surrounding trade, and a lot of that's starting to feed into the data, especially with the manufacturing numbers and the ISM numbers that you're seeing. And so it becomes a bit difficult, I think, for people to kind of change their narrative on it. And I'm not saying change their narrative on a dime, like 1 week or one day they wake up and, become a perma bear over bull. But, I think a lot of the uncertainty now is certainly playing into markets. And that's kind of why we're treading waters, because no one really knows yet how this is going to go on. I don't think a lot of people expected, maybe for this to go on as long as it has. And then you probably have some people, a handful that expect it to go on for a lot longer. So the uncertainty around that, you're starting to see really kind of bleed into, other markets. And so whether that's showing up in bonds and now, potentially putting some pressure on the S&P if we actually do get rates, backing up a bit, it just kind of goes to show, I think it makes the job of, being a strategist or a macro, giving your macro outlook and things like that, a pretty complex topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Last 30 seconds, Kevin. Delphi just released a report. Do you want to make a comment on that and at all?
Yeah, no, I mean, we just put out a couple new we call token reports. They're looking at different individual assets. The most recent one that we put out was on something called Decred, which is actually really interesting. It's got kind of a hybrid consensus mechanism. For all those who don't know what that is, feel free to reach out to me and I can certainly explain that, because it'll take a bit longer than 30 seconds. But it's a kind of an interest. We're starting to branch out, see some interesting new kind of token economic structures and models. And so basically what our job is and what we're trying to do is, figure out where you can kind of bucket this, whether it's, a Bitcoin competitor, so to speak, and fits in that store of value sleeve. If it's more of a kind of digital asset, like a smart contract platform, those types of things, we're putting out more and more research on to just try and, pioneer different ways to value these types of things, or ways in which you can think about, crypto networks as a whole.
Great. Guys, I want to thank you so much for always making time for this show. I know you both are incredibly busy. Oliver, you've got another show to prepare for. You're watching the market. And Kevin, you've got a practice to run.
Thank you.
You guys have a great weekend, and we will talk to you all very soon.
Have a good one.
Thank you, sir.
Bye, guys.
Have a good one.
All right, bye, guys.
Welcome back. Now we're going to shift gears, talk a little real estate. And on the line with me, MarketWatch's real estate reporter, Mr. Jacob Passy. How are you?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
Doing great. It looks like the weather is turning a bit cooler here in the Northeast.
Yeah, we had. I was out of town, but I saw that it got up into the 90s this week, which seemed insane to me, or whatever. It was hotter here in New York than it was where I was traveling down in Florida.
Yeah, well, now I think it's turned. This morning when I got up, and we're recording this on Friday in case anyone hasn't guessed, because we're not going to all talk to each other on a Sunday morning, even though we all like each other. It was very cool this morning. So it looks like fall is here. And, Jacob, just wanted to check in with you in terms of real estate. What's going on in your neck of the woods these days?
Yeah, so Zillow put out their annual consumer housing trends report, which had some interesting little factoids in it. So one of the big ones that I thought was interesting in light of kind of, what's been going on in the market lately is this report is based on a survey that they do with a bunch of consumers. And so one of the questions they asked was why people were moving. And they broke it down basically, into two different categories, or kind of three different categories, I guess. So one was life events, one was market dynamics, and then the third choice was neither of those two. So life events would be, like having a second kid, or, retiring, or, becoming an empty nester, things like that. Factors, changes in your family structure, things like that. Getting married could be one too. And then market dynamics is kind of, fluctuation in prices, fluctuation in mortgage rates, things like that. And what those surveys showed, which has kind of been a long-standing thing that if you focus on real estate a lot, is that life events outweigh market dynamics by a fair amount. So 35% of people said that life events were why they moved, compared with just 21% of people who said market dynamics were why they moved, and then almost half said that neither of those two factors were why they moved. And so, it's kind of, I think that's important to take into consideration right now, because one of the big ongoing stories in the real estate market is mortgage rates, because mortgage rates are near historic lows, a little bit above historic lows, but still very, very low, and might continue to drop. This week they kind of stayed in around the same range they were a week ago, but throughout the summer, the big story was that mortgage rates were dropping, which was not what was expected for this year, and they're dropping for a range of reasons. A lot of it having to do with the economy, concerns that the economy is slowing down here in the U.S., concerns about economic growth overseas, concerns about trade with China and other countries. So, all these factors weigh on consumer sentiment, weigh on, financial the financial markets, and therefore, have an effect on mortgage rates. And so I thought, that one factoid was kind of interesting just to keep in mind, when we're looking what's going on in real estate markets, it's important to remember that most, I guess in this case, like over a third of the time, but most frequently, people are moving because of a life event. They're buying a new home because their family is growing or shrinking, or they just got married, things like that. The little fluctuations in mortgage rates aren't alone going to be probably enough to convince someone of buying a home. It's going to take a multitude of factors, and people, and then the other important reason I bring this all up also is because if mortgage rates start going up, there's going to be a natural concern of the effects that could have on the housing market, whether that will disincentivize buying a home. Affordability has been a huge issue, and we've talked a lot about that, and so that's another reason why people were optimistic about mortgage rates was going down, was because it makes buying a home a little bit cheaper, which can certainly help. And I think it's important to remember that a lot of people are going to have to move no matter what. They're going to have to get a new home because they just can't fit in their old home, or because they can't afford, when your kids are out of the home and, you don't necessarily need those extra 2 or 3 bedrooms, and you're living on a fixed income, it might make more sense to downsize into a smaller home. So all of those factors still go on no matter where mortgage rates are. And then the report also had some other interesting things about debt. They polled folks to see what percentage of buyers had debt when time came to buy a home. So 42% of buyers had credit card debt, 20% had student loan debt, and 16% had medical debt. And overall, 56% of buyers had some form of debt. So, they kind of went into, the effect that has, and, how debt can, make buying a home that much harder. One of the interesting, factoids that they presented was, the percentage of people with debt who were likely to experience mortgage denial. So, overall, 18% of prospective home buyers experience a mortgage denial before they successfully get a home loan, but it's much higher. That share is much higher for people with medical and student loan debt. So over a third of people with medical debt who are hoping to buy a home experienced a mortgage denial, and 27% of people with student loan debt went through that same experience. So that's a much higher share of people than the overall figure, and it kind of just shows how these two forms of debt can put a serious strain on your finances. And so it's not just that the debt alone isn't just what underwriters are looking at. They're also just looking at how much you're making in income, and they're basically, these people, if you have a high amount of, medical or student loan debt, it makes it that much harder to make, your payments on time and to handle everything depending on what your income is. And that's not even taking into consideration the fact that a lot of people with these forms of debt can't even afford to think about buying a home because they're barely making ends meet. So just kind of showed, it was a good, kind of way of showing how impactful debt can be on people's lives.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, and you never get to pick. You were talking earlier about, and I guess it's really no surprise. I mean, people move because their families get bigger, they get smaller, they want to move to a different area for whatever reason, and that always doesn't align with kind of the traditional parameters that professionals like yourself are tracking, right? I mean, people
Right.
don't get to pick and choose the timing that their kids leave for college. I guess they can do a little bit better planning, though, right, Jacob?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
I was going to say, I mean, they could do better planning, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, they
that.
could certainly do better planning, but especially when it comes to something like medical debt,
Yeah.
that shows the importance of planning, but it also shows how life's curveballs can be rather cruel. I think there's a lot of focus, especially when writing about real estate, on student loan debt, and millennials and Gen Zers now taking out too much in student loans, and the trickle effect that has on the rest of their financial lives, and there's all this writing about how student debt was what was preventing more people from becoming home buyers. But I thought the medical debt part was especially interesting. They also had another finding that showed that 63% of renters with medical debt said that they couldn't cover an unexpected expense of $1,000. So compared with less than half of all renters. So having medical debt made it significantly more likely that you would start falling behind on things, and I think that does go to this is why you should build up an emergency fund when things are good, but it also just kind of shows that sometimes the things that make it hard to reach these financial goals aren't things that you can plan for, or maybe you should just assume that you're going to have some medical expense that's going to make matters tough for you. But I guess what I'm kind of getting at is that I think there's a lot, people talk a lot about, things that are foreseen, like student,
Mm-hmm.
If you're taking out a student loan that, that's a loan that you're going to have to pay off, that, is going to be a large amount. We know that the interest rates on those loans are relatively higher than, other forms of debt sometimes, and can be, and it can also, the interest rates can often be, can be adjustable rates. And so it's important to also keep in mind the fact that, a lot of what people are struggling with are the, kind of unforeseen expenses. And so that does go to, you need to have emergency savings, but also, when you're looking at, when you're wondering why aren't more people buying homes, it's not just student loans, it's, a whole multitude of factors.
Yeah.
And, kind of also shows how, everything from, health insurance to savings to homeownership are all interrelated.
Absolutely. It's like the market, right? The stock market. It's never, you can't just point to talk about tariffs. That may scare some
Right.
people off, but it could be people just don't have the money this week or whatever. I think you're absolutely right. And it's really hard. I'm sure it's really hard from your position. Last question, to, for readers, you're oftentimes trying to put something down in 1,000, 2,000 word story. But you can't always point to one particular rationale as to why something occurred. I think that can be a challenge.
Yeah,
I'm sure.
no, it's definitely challenging. I mean, there are certain times when it's easy to understand why right now more people aren't buying homes in certain parts of the country, because homes have just gotten to be so expensive, and you kind of just know inherently that not everyone who lives in those who live in those areas is going to be able to afford, to buy. But then when you get into the more, kind of systemic issues, why nationwide we're seeing, depressed levels of homeownership and things like that. It's not just one factor. And a lot of these, factors aren't changing quickly anytime soon. They're, kind of longer term issues that need to be dealt with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jacob, it's always a pleasure talking with you. Welcome back. I hope you had a good time resting. And you know what? It's the weekend, so maybe you get a chance to rest again.
Exactly. Looking forward to it.
All right, my friend. Take care. Have a great rest of your time.
Take care. Bye.
That was a great market segment, great real estate segment. Let's switch gears and let's talk to Ms. Alessandra Melito. She is a retirement reporter, or the retirement reporter for Market Watch. Hey, Allie, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I know you're on tight deadlines today and always with a lot of work, putting out a ton of content on the Market Watch site. But I wanted to check in and ask, what is top of mind for you this week? What have you been covering, and what is up at the top for you?
Yeah, so I wrote the story about a woman who went from being in about $20,000 of debt as a recent college grad to having now about $100,000 saved away and also invested. It was a really inspiring story, and she is a really inspiring person. And it just highlighted the importance of having some sort of financial literacy. So I had done that story last week about presidential candidate Andrew Yang, who he said that it's hard to teach it's hard to teach financial literacy or financial education to people who don't have any money. And he received some criticism for that. Some people agreed with him and said that it's hard to practice what you preach when you have nothing to practice with. And then other people said, well, how do you expect people to get out of bad financial situations if they aren't taught any of these lessons, and that they can use those lessons when they do come into money? So I followed up and I found this wonderful woman, and she is from New York. She grew up in a low-income household with her two parents and they had 9 children. She went to college on a full scholarship, which was great, but she noticed that there were a lot of differences between her and other people. So she went to high school near Lincoln Center, which is a very wealthy area, and students in that particular neighborhood, they were always wearing brand name clothes, and they were always coming back from like the Christmas or December break with the latest coolest gadgets and stuff like that. And then she went to college, and it was kind of the same thing, where she noticed that people always had money to go out to eat or to grab a drink or to do anything that they wanted to do, and she didn't necessarily feel that was her case. So she went out and she got a credit card. So she had her first credit card, and then it ended up being 2 credit cards, 3 credit cards, and she then ended up with, by the time she graduated, about $20,000 in debt.
Oh, no.
So what was really inspiring was that instead of just being completely overwhelmed and just quitting, not just giving up on the idea of paying that down, she actually she read one book. She saw it while she was at a pharmacy, and it was called Women and Money by Susie Orman. And she read that book, and then she realized there was so much information that she didn't know. So she started listening to podcasts, she started watching YouTube videos and TED Talks, and reading more books on the topic. And she went from paying off that debt to saving $50,000 within 2 years, and now she's doubled that within 18 months of hitting the 50,000 mark. And she said that she owes a lot of that to the fact that she did have that financial literacy revelation, and she created her own YouTube channel to be able to share some of her own lessons about money for people who may think that they are, who might be in similar situations to what she was in. And it was just a really lovely conversation to talk to her about the fact that while she started out not having those lessons, finally teaching them to herself proved really, really beneficial.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind just sending me her YouTube page. I'll put it on the the podcast link when I put it out, because I think that it's stories like that which are amazing, and I think people can learn from. I mean, just the perseverance of someone who did what they could, and she didn't necessarily have the means to financial means, but she figured out a way, and I think that perseverance is important. You can't train that. You have to have that inside of you to want to persevere. So that's an amazing story. I love those types of stories.
Yeah, and then I talked to her a little bit about what was like the first step. What does she think the first step has to be? If you are in a similar situation, or you know somebody who's in a similar situation where maybe they're in debt, or maybe they don't really, they're living paycheck to paycheck and they don't have much money to play with, so they can't think about investing right now. And she said for her, the first thing was just embracing all the information that was out there, like knowing that she didn't know that much about not only her money, but just money in general. She didn't know much about the interest rates on her credit card. She didn't know much about investing, and just embracing that, that there is so much knowledge out there that you can take advantage of. So that was hers. And then I spoke to a few other people about what they thought some of the first steps would be. Like, this wouldn't necessarily apply to some people who already have investment accounts and retirement accounts and all that, but I'm sure there's somebody who's either like they've got a young child, or not a young child, like a teenager or somebody in the family who might be in similar situations where they're starting out and they don't have that much education around finances. And, obviously a lot of schools in the country don't teach that. And other people said, like, consider automating. So like taking a percentage of your salary, putting that towards savings or debt repayment, talking about it. That was a big one. You don't have to feel overwhelmed or afraid to talk about money, even though it is a very taboo topic in society. You could talk to family and friends and just be like, listen, I'm in this situation and it's not a very pleasant one, but what do you think? Or like, I don't even want to know what you think. I just want to be able to vent about it. Maybe I'll come up with my own solution by talking about it out loud. And then, of course, looking for side hustles. That's what this woman did. She did a lot of side hustles to pay off that debt and then to start saving. And she said that was obviously very impactful on her net worth.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think what you're finding, and you already knew this, and I think our listeners can hear that there's a different story for everybody, all 300 plus million Americans, and you can take little pieces from people and learn from them. And there is information out there. And yeah, we need to do a much better job, Allie, on getting people in secondary school and colleges and K through 12, and even in kindergarten, learning and understanding the basics of, finance, as long as they can, people can cognitively understand that. I mean, obviously don't want to be wasting time, but this is something that's really important. And imagine how great our society would be if much more of us were financially stable and didn't have the pressure, the financial pressures, the debt, all those things that weigh on us, because it can disrupt other aspects of our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, there obviously needs to be more of prioritization of financial literacy. And I think that if it doesn't start in the schools, it can at least start in like family conversations. Even if that, the problem is, like, not everybody is like fully well versed in different financial topics. Like parents, sometimes they don't want to teach these lessons to their kids because they don't know the lessons themselves. But being open even about something like that, where you can learn together, that would be more impactful than not talking about it and then, keeping these sorts of secrets and, maybe accruing debt and then like being afraid to talk about that with your loved ones, or just feeling helpless and not turning to anybody, So if the schools aren't going to do it and society's not going to do it, I say we do it first.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that mentality. Allie, it's always a pleasure talking with you. Great stories this week. Makes me feel good going into the weekend. And look forward to reading more from you and Jacob as well during next week. So have a great weekend. We'll talk to you very soon.
All right. Thank you.
Welcome back. No show would be complete without a visit with our retirement rock stars, the Legal Eagles. And joining on the line is one of the Eagles this week, David Levine. He's a principal with Groom Law Group, an employee benefits firm based in Washington, D.C. Hi, David. How are you?
I am good, Jeff. Thanks for having me. I missed my other eagle. He flew the nest and he's missing.
Oh, no. Well, I hope he gets located, but we're glad that we were able to locate you. So what's top of mind for at least you this week?
Well, top of mind, and I think it's maybe an homage to my fellow eagle. As everybody knows, Kevin likes to work in on every call discussion of missing
I
participants,
know.
but it's but it's rare that I get the chance to actually talk about it myself because it's his baby. So this week, I thought I'd sort of do a little recap of some of the stuff that's out there at this point because there have been some discussions about missing participants, uncashed checks. There's been a lot going on. We're still waiting for progress, and I think one of the things that we're waiting to see is how things evolve, just regulatory wise, in the next coming months. So
Yep.
what I thought I would do is, if it works for you, is sort of recap a little about the investigation world, because we have a lot of clients who obviously have ongoing investigations, and we have a lot of clients who also move record keepers. It's not just about DOL investigations; it's about how do you take responsibility. So rather than say, "Oh, well, we're still waiting for guidance," because the IRS put out some guidance, as we know, on people who don't cash their checks and such very recently, but really what we're really talking about is, what do you do? And talking about some practical steps. If you're a service provider, the core question that comes to mind right now, if you're dealing with missing participants on cash checks, what responsibility do you have? We all talk about living in an individual responsibility world, and Kevin and I make our jokes, but who owns it? Is it the plan sponsor? Is it the service provider? Look at your terms and contracts and agreements. That's really the big thing at this point. I think everybody in this industry assumes, oh, it's not me. And it's important to actually figure out who owns that decision. It's not that big a deal, but I think that will help resolve a lot of confusion. Because in the end, a lot of the time, you can buy services. It's the plan fiduciary, it's the plan sponsor, effectively, in a lot of cases, that owns this. They're the
Yeah.
ones who have to run people down. That's the beginning. But then we'll talk about steps you can actually do and things you might think about. But
Yeah.
what do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, I'm with you on that, David. I think this is obviously very, and people that I talk to, and I'm sure you talk to a lot more people inside and outside the industry, but people that I talk to, unlocatable assets, very important. And, people obviously are not saving enough as it is to not even know or not be wary of where some of your money is, even if it's like $100 or $10, that can be the difference for some people. So clearly this is a big issue. There are lots of big issues, obviously, that you and the Eagles are covering, but that's my thoughts. Let's try to get this one worked through, or one of the many things worked through.
Well, and I think let's talk about some practical takeaways if you're the person who owns end responsibility for this. And then at the end today, I have to give my Groundhog Day, the Secure Act, of course, because if not, you'll ask about it.
Yes.
I think some practical takeaways at this point is, if you are switching vendors or you are acquiring or merging a plan, try to gather as much data as you can and figure out what services. A lot of vendors have baseline services and enhanced services. Come up with your process and watch to figure out what's going on. That is the key thing. Oftentimes, the switching of a vendor, the merging of a plan, the acquiring, leaves you in a place where you assume out of the box, oh, it's just there. When you have those moments, that's the best time to grab and capture everything. Vendors are not expected to keep data forever, but the problem is, I've had claims from participants who come up 20 years later saying, where's my benefit? If you don't track your data and figure out how you're going to track it, it does fall back on you. It doesn't just fall on your record keepers. So that's to keep in mind. But more fun, Kevin will be more incendiary. We need guidance, and he's right. We do need the DOL hopefully to give us a path to ending sort of for the past. I think people want to do what's right going forward, but we're looking forward to a solution for the past. But let's talk secure.
Yes. Tell us about the Secure Act. We've been waiting for months on this thing. So give us the lowdown. You're on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, well, secure is insecure, as has been in prior weeks.
Nice.
It remains in a state of constant insecurity. There's many folks who have worked very hard to move things along, and as we've talked about, last week, the longer things wait, the harder it gets. And I am not going to take a position on impeachment, but I will say discussion of impeachment certainly sucks a little more oxygen out of the room and makes it even harder for anything to get done. So the real question is, what do we see from Secure and how will it be implemented? Could the proposals that were floating to pull out defined benefit plan relief to move on their own path happen? Maybe. Could the regulators, the DOL, has their RFI that they did recently for like expanding open maps? Could the DOL decide they have authority to do it? We'll have to see. So could it be almost the flip of the Obama administration, where the Obama administration said, Republican Congress, you won't pass anything. We're going to do things by regulation. Well, the last year, the Trump administration's first term, be the same way. And notice I say first term because we just don't know where the election's going to land. We could have a second term or we might not. But that is way beyond an Eagles pay grade, and I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think you're right. But I think what's amazing, and I think you're right, we shouldn't talk about impeachment other than it sucks the oxygen out of the room for other business. The business that Secure Act has already passed the House of Representatives, so it's something that needs to be taken up in the Senate. And you and Kevin have nicely documented as to the who, how, and why on that. So I guess it's just more to come. But you knew I was going to ask, and I appreciate you getting myself and the audience an update. And let's keep our fingers crossed, right?
Absolutely, and we will talk soon.
Absolutely, Dave. Have a great weekend. Give Kevin our best, and we'll see you next week.
Well, I am hoping I can find him. So have a great weekend.
Bye. Well, folks, that wraps up this episode of the Weekly Pulse Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us this week. Hope you learned something new. Hey, and if you have a financial topic or something of interest you think that we should discuss, don't forget, drop us a line. We're always listening. And for more great content each and every week, you can tune into the Broadcast Retirement Network's BRN AM. It's available through your app, through the Morning Pulse, and so many other ways. It's every day, Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. So until next week, I'm Jeff Snyder. Keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.